you've ever been. Oh my gosh.
Okay, yeah, so for anyone who hasn't been here, welcome. I'm Nicole. Clayton introduced you. But mainly, we're here today because we're celebrating one Susan McPherson. So I'm imagining a lot of you know her just because that's the person she is. For anyone that doesn't, words probably can't begin to describe her, but we're going to try to give it some justice with these. So Susan, as Jane says beautifully, is a giver. Less importantly, she's also a serial entrepreneur, an angel investor, a founder of a corporate social responsibility communications firm focused at the intersection of brand and, again, like social responsibility. Has also written a book that we're going to talk about today, The Lost Art of Connecting, which was recently named, actually in 2021, was Fortune's top
One of. I don't want to over, but embellish. One of the top business books of 2021.
Got it. So we're super fortunate. But kind of like before I begin, also one of the important things you do is you're also kind of counsel and an angel investor for female-led startups, which is just so, I think that's just like impactful to see someone that we can look up to. So thank you for what you do, more importantly than anything else. And now, to give back, let's celebrate your book and let's celebrate you. I kind of want to start at the beginning. I like things chronological.
Okay, that's a long time.
But I remember one of the things I was learning about you was I kind of want to hear more about your childhood and why you thought growing up connecting was something that was normal.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, and first of all, thank you all for coming today. And thank you to SaksWorks and to Nicole and Clayton for making this possible. I feel like I'm in somebody's mansion, right? But like a comfy mansion, you know, not the kind where you're like afraid to sit on anything because you might like scuff it up or something like that. But also, thank you for that beautiful welcome. I'm like teary-eyed and you know, launching a book in March of 2021 during a pandemic is never easy. So this is only like the third or fourth like in real life book talk. So I'm still kind of like wondering, is there like a screen between me and you all, you know? But I'm filled with gratitude that not only you're hosting this a year later, but also the fact that you all came out because everybody is busy. But yes, I grew up in a household where connecting was just actually like in the DNA of the family. Every morning at the breakfast table, I would literally sit down, and we had a very small breakfast table. I grew up in a house, I think that was 1,200 square feet for 5 people, which, you know, obviously is wonderful for many, many people on this planet, but it's still somewhat small. But the breakfast table, there would be 5 local newspapers splayed out. And this was in upstate New York, near Albany. Not a place I wish anyone to grow up, but in case anybody is from Albany, my apologies. And then yesterday's or the day before's New York Times and Boston Globe. My father was a professor for almost 40 years at a women's college, teaching Russian history of all subjects. And my mother did public relations for various PBS stations. But the two of them every morning would sit there with their either razor blade or scissors, clipping and cutting, and then going to their respective manual typewriters and typing little short missives, kind of like what we do on social media today or via email, and just saying, you know, thinking of you, Cousin Harry. I didn't have a Cousin Harry. Thinking of you, you know, reporter Jim at, you know, the Boston Globe. Thinking of you, you know, colleague Matilda. And then off into the mail they would go. And I just assumed everybody's parents did that. They also instilled in me something that honestly I probably didn't realize until maybe my mid or late 40s, that this notion of every single person is deserving of our attention, our interest, our compassion, and our curiosity. And people who you may not think be that like ticket or entry point or person who can help us actually flip the switch, can actually be really helpful, and you can be helpful to them. So like I grew up with this just enormous curiosity that I think I carry to today. I just love finding out like what makes people tick, asking them how you can be helpful, and then going ahead and being helpful, right? Like it's my whatever, my orgasm, I guess I could say. Forget that term.
Okay, keep it down.
It's a little early for that kind of talk, sorry. Anyway, but that was the world, and of course when I got my first fax machine in the late 80s, early 90s. I was like a kid in a candy store because I could do what my parents did. And, immediately, although I have to say, we're talking 30 years later, those faxes probably never got to them. Can I see a show of hands? How many of you could ever figure out how to use a fax machine? Yeah. Do you remember like the paper? Some of you probably never have had to even try. And then the internet happened, and then social media, and all these things have made connecting far easier.
Definitely. Well said. Orgasm part, especially well said. What would you say, was there like a point where you felt like specifically you had adopted this as part of your identity?
That's a really good question. A few of you know my mom was killed in a real bad tragedy when I had just turned 22. She was killed in a hotel fire on New Year's Eve back in 1986. And I still to this day, obviously whenever you suffer a tragedy, everything you remember, but a few weeks later when we were having the memorial service, and I remember getting up to speak, I have no idea what I said, but I do remember from that day forward, I had in my heart that I wanted to continue my mom's ability to connect. I didn't think, in 40 years I'm gonna write a book about that, none of that, but I recognized because 600 people came to her memorial service. It was the third week in January during a nor'easter. Wow. And this was in 1987. And it dawned on me, I was like, this is what, she was just my mom, but she had impacted and made connections with so many people. So I just felt like there's something I want to carry forward and continue to keep that spirit alive. So I do think that was almost, if you were to say, an aha moment.
Got it. Out of curiosity with that one, do you feel like you kept the spirit alive? I, from a biased answer, think absolutely, but I'm just curious kind of where you landed.
Well, I proved it when I wrote when I memorialized her in the front page of the book. And oftentimes I'm asked, what was the best part of writing the book? I was like, to be able to put that, in memory of my mom on that white page. Because now I finally did it. Because it's like, isn't it if it's in writing, you're like, but yeah. So that was cathartic to me to be able to do that. My only regret is I didn't do this. My dad passed in 2008, and he would have gone to every bookstore all over the country and bought he was that kind of person. We all know parents like that.
Yeah, I'm sure he's very proud currently. So with that, I kind of moved into the book.
Sure.
So Lost Art of Connecting, we talked about it. One of Fortune's best books in 2021, maybe 2022, maybe 2023 and onwards. Obviously, the content-wise couldn't have been better timing, just in terms of us coming, and it's just amazing timing. But also the content's kind of timeless. What ultimately led to you wanting to write this book? I guess it sounds like it was always on the horizon. What was the final?
There were a couple of things that over the years, one, I really felt, and I'm sure many of you can agree with this, that we had gotten to this point where all that mattered were the clicks and the likes and the followers versus, true human connection, like making a difference, helping others out. Myself included, we all look at how are we doing? Two, a friend of mine said to me that when she dropped this was about 5 years ago, when she would take her 10-year-old and 12-year-old to the bus stop in the morning and she would hug them goodbye and set them up on the yellow school bus. As soon as they both took their respective seats, their heads would bop down to look at their phones. Mm-hmm. But here was the picture. Every other child on the school bus did the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that kind of I don't have amazing memories of my bus rides, but I did talk to my fellow classmates. And then lastly, I founded my company almost 9 years ago. And about 7 years in, I realized 90% of our business has been inbound. Okay? So what that told me is all those connections that I made in my 20s, in my 30s. I met Ingmar, I met you probably 25 years ago. Now I met in 2007, I think, through the Clinton Global Initiative. But it's like those folks I met came back to support. They might not be clients of our company, but they knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. And I thought, what, it would be a good exercise to share this with people. And because, I'm one of those people for years, I was like, nobody wants to hear from me. I kept, that was the voice that kept winning. And then when I really saw the amazing bit of business that just continued, and it still is today. We just signed Nike as a client yesterday. Wow. But I meant and that was because somebody I worked with 10 years ago at Coca-Cola. Like, it's just, so there's something there.
Got
I
it.
don't know what it is, but.
Also, another moment to kind of just like pause, asterisk, side note, the fact that you were running a company, which obviously just signed Nike yesterday, so they're a big deal, whilst writing this book is in and of itself its own.
During a global pandemic.
During a global pandemic.
Although I did, I had a wonderful co-writer, Jackie Ashton. She's on the cover of my book. I will forever be grateful to her. And and I remember when I was, there's a question of, do you put your co-writer on the cover? And I was like, well, of course. And people are like, yeah, but it takes away. I was like, I don't care. Of course I'm going to put her on the cover. So anyhow, just a side note. But yes, that helped. I will say though, and Jane knows this, I had 2021. The book launched in March. I had 3 hospital stays. I lost a third of my hair, and my dog had major surgery. And our company doubled in size. So it was a manic year. The hair's growing back, so they're back. But it was a riding roughshot. But yes, so it was exhausting.
Definitely. And it was like another testament to you giving and trying to democratize wisdom whilst losing hair in a global pandemic, which are not mutually exclusive.
No,
Mutually exclusive.
Totally.
Also, your hair looks amazing. Just so we're clear, I feel like that's probably a symbol / a metaphor for how everything else is going.
Yeah, thank you.
That's good to hear. Okay, so I think from like a bias standpoint, I think around people in my generation specifically are kind of allergic to the word networking.
Yes.
So kind of diving into the contents of the book, I'm really curious. You talk about this idea of constellation relationships.
Yes.
Can you kind of explain what that is and how that differs from this allergic word networking?
Yeah. Well, let me see a show of hands. How many of you have received an invitation to connect on LinkedIn? You say yes, and then within an hour somebody's selling you something. Yeah, right? What if instead they did a little research and they found out Zara had this great new job at GE, and they knew somebody who wanted to buy something major from GE and reached out to you and said, Zara, I'd love to connect with you. I know this person who wants to do business and buy from GE. Wouldn't that be much more, instead of, Zara, can I pick your brain to help me? So one of the reasons I called the book The Lost Art of Connecting versus Networking is I believe there's a difference. I'm not anti-networking. We have to do it, and we will continue to do it, especially coming out of the pandemic. But I think of networking as very transactional. And if you look up the definition in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, you kind of want to take a shower afterwards. It's a little bit. And no, I'm not talking about orgasms again. But the notion is to get out of the transaction, get out of the small talk, and become much more vulnerable and human, and lead with how you can be helpful. I joke, but in the 80s, my first professional role was at USA Today. And I was a researcher, so I would do interviews with people that would appear in the stories. And before I would interview a particular person, I would have 2 sources to get up to speed: the Yellow Pages and the Encyclopedia Britannica. There's not a whole lot of detail, yes, in the Encyclopedia, but the most people I interviewed were not in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And today, there's no excuse when you're reaching out to somebody. Take 5 minutes to find out. I mean, on Twitter, you can find out what they're ranting about. On LinkedIn, you can find out about their latest professional success. On Instagram, you can find out if they have grandchildren. So there's really no reason you can't just flip the switch. And the notion of constellations of connections goes back to, and this is a little crystal woo-woo, but when in antiquity, when people would look up at the sky and try to figure it out, they made stories. They created stories on, to explain what they saw in the sky. Mind you, I have only seen the Big Dipper and Little Dipper. I've never seen any of the others, but they're there. And who has seen all? Has anybody? Because I, to this day, like Capricorn and Sagittarius, yeah, whatever. But the fact is when you meet people and then you introduce them to other people, you have no idea the impact or the stories that are going to come out of that. So it's overlapping like the stars in the sky. So it's a little out there if you're not. I mean, I'm not a crystal woo-woo. That was pretty out there for me.
Well, I felt like it wasn't crystal blue, and it was well said.
Thank
I
you.
feel less like I want to shower after that definition. Another question, I think, kind of diving more into the book and the title in and of itself.
Yeah.
The art of connecting, the gather, ask, and do method for building meaningful relationships. So can you tell us about the gather, ask, do method?
Of course.
I've definitely learned it, but it's way more fun to kind of just hear it from you.
Thank you. Well, when you write a business book, which I'm sure now you have, right? I mean, you have to have a methodology, right? And I am like the least methodological, I can't even say the word, person. But I realized I had to take whatever I had been doing and crystallize it. And I created this methodology called Gather, Ask, Do. In the gather phase, which is the first phase, you connect with the most important person on the planet. Guess who that is? Yourself. Yes, very good. And then you think about what your superpowers are. Because the underlying premise under everything in the entire book is leading with how I can be helpful. So you need to understand what your superpowers are, or your secret sauces, or your chief differentiating factors, so you can be helpful. You also, during the gather phase, think about what your goals are for the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. And you think about how you are going to do whatever you can to break that hermetically sealed bubble that so many of us live in, myself included, that we tend to attract and hang out and connect with people who look like us, sound like us, the same age, race, and cultural heritage as us. So that is very much the gather phase. Once you do that, you go to the ask phase. And the ask phase is learning to ask the meaningful questions of others so you can find out what their goals and hopes and dreams are. And it doesn't, I'm not talking like, but the thing is when you're having conversations, instead of asking somebody, how they are, you can ask them like what Brene Brown says, tell me in 3 words how you're feeling today. Or what can you, where do you want to go after this pandemic and why? Or if you could solve one problem in this world, what would it be? And are there ways I can be supportive to help you get there? Anyhow, blah, blah, blah. But in the book, there's like a chapter that has 11 questions that you can ask that lead you to find out a little bit more about that person you're having a conversation with. And lastly, the do phase. If during the ask phase, you listen and pay attention, which I'm woefully bad at doing, and I learned a lot about the process of listening in the book, you can get to the do phase, which Jane knows is my favorite place, and that's where you take what you listened, what you heard, and you get into action. You make those introductions, you make connections, you make introductions. Zara's in a community that I'm in called the We Suite, and I think you see, that's where I love. It's crazy, but I just, in terms of somebody says, can I have a connection to, or an introduction to, or do you know, it's like, unless I'm like super, 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 super busy, or in the hospital, which happened a few times last year, I will see what I can do to help. It's just, and for no reason other than what we should all be that way. So that's the gather, ask, do.
So we should all be that way. Easier said than done.
So
much easier said than done.
I don't have children, I don't have parents, I don't have a significant other. So I understand I have kind of more bandwidth than people who have little ones running around. I do have a dog, but she and I speak a different language.
Still not enough to discredit yourself for, again, like all the work that you're doing. My question to you is, you talked about how you love being in the do phase, right? Like that's kind of your home. What have you found when working with, obviously, people have unique, I guess, methodologies, but have you found there's kind of just one almost bottleneck area in the gather, ask, do method that's like the most difficult for people to kind of get through?
Well, a number of things. Listening is one factor. If we're in conversations with people, and believe me, I am the first person to be thinking about, the Thai food I'm going to order tonight, or or the dishes that I happen to leave in my sink. So if we can get better at listening and also do away with anticipatory listening, which I always want to say, like, these are things I've learned about myself, where I'm already thinking about how I can be doing, so I stop I start to not listen as much as I should. The other thing is it's okay to carry a notepad or use the notes function on your phone, because what I like to do when I follow up with somebody is not say, it was great meeting you at the SaksWorks luncheon, but instead say, it was great to find out about your passion for hummus, or what happened during our conversation. Just so you're building commonalities in the uncommonalities that we all have. I think other than listening, I think it's the time factor. I think people feel like if they're gonna commit to doing something, it's a huge time suck. And I learned this years ago from reading Adam Grant's first book, where he said the more meetings he took, the actually more efficient he became, because he's that much more efficient with his time. Now again, I'm not suggesting you take meetings all the time. A lot of times it doesn't need to be a meeting. It could be an email back and forth, right? Like where you get direct and say, okay, somebody asked you for a meeting, say back to them, what is it that you want to discuss? Maybe there's something I can do right away to help you. So, and sometimes we immediately go to that place where we think, oh, another meeting, right? And it might just be, it could be a text exchange. I think also the transition from asked to do is that, back to the time, you know, something pops in our brain and we're like, I'll get to it later. We know what happens. So, you know, now because we have the technology of our handheld devices with us, you know, 24/7, when somebody pops in my brain, I text them right away. Okay? Probably to their chagrin, but no, but like and during the pandemic, I was alone for a good chunk of the 2 years. And I would do three things. Every morning I would do the following. I would text or email or WhatsApp or phone 3 to 5 people. And, you know, there would be three things. One, put a little joy in the world, which we all need. Two, ask the person how she, he, or they is or are. And lastly, don't forget me, I'm here. And people would say to me, how, you know, because I'm going to continue to do that, and people would say, how do you do, you know, how? I'm like, I have time to brush my teeth, I have time to wash my hair. So my suggestion to you is you don't have to do 3 to 5. You could do one a day, you could do one a week, but set it as a goal. And, you know, by doing that without kind of the agenda, like just putting some good out there, the reverberations are what happens.
Got it. Wow, I have so
That was
many questions.
That was a long answer.
No, that's amazing. I mean, I guess one of my instant questions from that is from someone who is just terrible at answering texts. I don't know if anyone is like that in this room, but like I almost need that text or my new email. My phone's blowing up. So out of curiosity, obviously your capacity is going to be incredible now. You've been working at this for years. But do you feel like when you shoot that text, I love the practicality of this, when you kind of shoot those 3 to 5 texts and then you're getting responses back and then you're shooting new texts in a day, how do you kind of manage your capacity to be able to keep up with all of this?
No, that's, and there's no secret sauce. I will say, the texts that I send out, other than the ones asking how people are, generally aren't you know, it may spawn a little bit of a back and forth, but it's really just thinking of you. I also try when I meet people to ask them what their favorite mode of communication is, because some people don't want text, and I don't want to be that person that's like, hey, you know, I'm sure I have been, but you know, this is back to that technology. You can mark in somebody's, you know, entry in our woefully archaic. I mean, it's the fact that we still use the same contact systems that we used since the mid-90s, that whoever's an entrepreneur, there's a huge opportunity to upgrade that. But the thing is if you can put in there, you know, she prefers or he prefers email, you know, that way when you go ahead, that will pop up. I mean, it's not going to be perfect all the time, but I do want to avoid exactly what you're saying. If somebody is like, whoa, don't text me, I don't want to be that person.
That makes sense. And kind of bringing it back, you touched on just like an amazing point that again is so timely in society. You were talking about the importance of listening. And I know that's something that, again, I see easier said than done. And I will forever say easier said than done. But you were talking about kind of this little birdie in your head that comes through and that's like anticipatory listening, or you're getting thoughts while they're talking.
Yeah.
Or you're probably getting thoughts about how you should remember that they love hummus, and so you need to write that down later. What do you find is like an effective intervention for when you find yourself kind of drifting off listening to someone?
I admit it. I just say, I found myself dozing off. And that's about being vulnerable, because it's also this notion, we all do this, right? I mean, if there's somebody in the room that doesn't, by all means, let us know your secret, right? I mean, we're human. Our brains are, I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but they're pretty complicated, right? We also have been living through hell, right? I mean, the last 2 years, and to try to focus when you have your text blowing up, when you have social media, when you have puppies and kittens and babies at your feet, when you're taking care of elderly. I mean, it's a lot, and then you have a global invasion happening of a country. So, you know, I can't expect people, right? So when I'm in conversation and I say, Nicole, I missed what you said, do you mind repeating? I would imagine you would be like, of course I'm happy to repeat. If you don't, well then, there's, you know,
Yeah.
we can discuss that later, right? I mean, but I just think it's also being, you know, being honest, and we're all in this together. At different degrees. I know some people suffer immensely. You know, just the fact that I was alone is not nowhere near as bad as somebody who lost their job or lost a loved one. So I want to be very conscious of that.
Definitely. I need to pick your brain kind of about your own day-to-day habits and hygienes and whatnot, but I'm going to steer it back. I have a couple more questions regarding the book. So you got to tell us about FOMO versus JOMO.
Well, how many of you in high school would come back on Mondays after a weekend and find out about all the parties you didn't get invited to? Right? And it was awful. Sure. But thankfully, for those of us of my generation, we didn't have to watch the parties happening in real time, right? Which I think of my nieces and younger, how challenging that must be. But in the early 90s, and Admar may remember this, I was running a sales territory for a company, PR Newswire, which I was with for 17 years. And I was operating in an area of Southern California where no one had heard of the company. So anytime I would call a prospective client, they'd be like, who are you? We don't want to see you. So I couldn't get a meeting if I tried. And so the two other people I knew in public relations in the kind of Orange County part of California, I said, let's get together for coffee. And the three of us had a wonderful time, and we decided that we were going to repeat it, and that each of them were going to bring two people in the industry. And within 6 months, we had like 100 people that were joining. And years later, when I kept seeing FOMO, I was like, you know what I did that time? I turned FOMO into JOMO. Not the joy of missing out, the joy of meeting others. And within 3 years, we had turned the tide on that sales territory and became the #1 kind of wire service. I look back at that and think, what a colossal waste of time trying to get somebody to use it when I think about like the work that I've done for the last 20 years, but anyhow, I digress. But now, my advice to people who might be shy or introverted is, when you think of gathering, when you think of bringing people together, it can be terrifying, but you don't have to do all the gathering. Like you can, you know, Nell and I can set up a social impact luncheon, and she can invite 2 people, and I can invite 2 people, and we can ask those 2 people, right? And by then we have like 15 people. So that's my frame of reference of switching FOMO to JOMO. That's all.
Wow. T-shirts. We can make T-shirts together, get printed. Okay, so another thing that you touched on, which is kind of tangential to this, you were talking about in your gather method, again, something so relevant to today's society, as is the entire book. I'm going to say that the entire time, just like playing drinking games every time I say something like that. Out of curiosity, you talked about the idea of like homogenous networks and us kind of just like finding people that are like-minded, similar, that might look like us and whatnot. Can you kind of talk about just like practical ways of making sure that we are able to diversify our networks and not just surround ourselves with like-minded individuals?
It's hard. I mean, there's no skipping that challenge. What I have done over the years, which I thought has been helpful to me, and hopefully it can be helpful to you, is whenever I would move to a new location, which I did quite a bit, I would get involved in local civic organizations, either volunteering. If I could, I'd write a check. But what I would find is I would meet people who are not like myself. Several years ago, I got very involved in the Lower East Side Girls Club in New York City. 85% of the girls who participate or join the Lower East Side Girls Club are girls of color. And I, just learning their experience, learning about the fact that the Lower East Side of Manhattan is one of the most, bifurcated. I mean, you have the very, very uber wealthy and very, very poor right next to each other. Like, I would not have learned so much about that if I hadn't put myself in that position. And the friendships I've made with some of these young girls who are now, in their 20s, moving on, are invaluable. And I want to remind you, if you volunteer, you don't have to do it 100 hours a week. It can be 1 hour a month of your wisdom, your time, your connections. Secondly, I am the biggest believer in just asking. if you want an introduction to somebody to diversify your network, you can ask the person who is in relation to that person. I think sometimes we're afraid to ask people to introduce us because it's a bother, it's a pain, it's work. It's a gift to be able to do that. And I think it is much better for us to say, oh my gosh, my network is completely homogeneous. Adora, can you open a couple of doors for me? I'd love to meet. And most people will say yes. I mean, there's always going to be people that are either, something's going on and they can't, and that's fine, or they're just assholes. Okay, but then we know what to do with that.
Mm-hmm. And even that, those assholes that really diversify your network. There you go.
Bingo. We all need a few of those, right? Don't have that assholes in my network. I gotta add them.
We're the 5% requirement. All right. We need to diversify this room.
We have one comedian in the room. Now I know we have two. Which is good.
Got you, Jane. Okay, so I want to be able to open up to questions.
Yeah,
I have two
and
more
comments.
questions.
Okay.
Questions and comments and t-shirt ideas because we got to get going. So, okay, I have two more questions for you. So one question is, again, I love the idea of kind of imparting practical wisdom upon people. In today's day and age, we talked about I get in a normal day workforce kind of starting with how can I help you and walking up to someone. What would you recommend for a lot of companies who are now either hybrid or fully remote with how they can kind of just create a connection amidst themselves?
Well, a couple of things. First and foremost, they have to make it a priority. For years, the art of connecting and networking was done at the annual sales conference, or it was done, at the annual whatever celebration or awards night. This needs to be baked in, and I did a lot of research for the book and learned that there's a professor out of Babson College named Rob Cross, who's quite famous in talking about the importance of having friends at work and how you're far more productive when you have friends. But in 2 years of the pandemic, it's very hard. But I want to backtrack in the sense of company executives need to make sure that this isn't something that's just relegated to happy hours, because it is going to drive productivity. It's going to help with attraction and retention. So first of all and foremost, it has to be a mind shift of the senior executive. 2, this notion of telling your employees to bring their full selves to work, whether they're working from home, working in a co-working space like SaksWorks, or going to an office, is BS unless they are going to do the work to make people feel comfortable and welcome. Okay, it's very easy to be, a successful CEO with, all the things that comes with that, and look at your entire workforce and be like, just be yourself, right? You have to make sure people feel comfortable. 3, do everything but the weather talk at weekly meetings, at gatherings, whether, some companies, what they're doing is they're bringing people together on, once a month, but do what you can to encourage. I mentioned Brene Brown. Instead of saying, how are you, encourage when you have calls with people to say, in 3 words, tell me how you are. Or instead of going to the weather talk, which, can I see a show of hands, how many of you, when you're on conference calls or Zoom chats, what happens? Weather, right? And you go nowhere. You learn nothing about other than what the weather is in Cleveland. No offense to Cleveland, I'm sure it was wonderful weather, but I don't care.
And who the hell cares?
Right. And instead, so for my company, on Mondays, we have our weekly team meeting, and we always open up with some sort of interesting prompt, like, what was your favorite food as a child? Right? Which gets everybody talking about something that, the tangents it takes you down. So if you are running companies, the onus is on leadership to make this happen. And encourage, almost incentivize your employees to reach out to other employees. I'll go back just real quickly. When I was at PR Newswire all those years, one of the things I prided myself on was learning about people who didn't do my job. In other words, that helped me be a better employee. It helped me be better with my clients because I understood what was happening in finance. But I did that because I would reach out to people and say, how can I be helpful to you? I want to learn about your role in marketing. Alex, can you give me 5 minutes? So instead of being like, Alex, I need your help. How can I be helpful to you? Anyhow, I'm babbling. I will stop.
Not babbling. We started with the Babson guy, now we're on babbling. Okay, I have 10,000 more questions, but I'm going to leave with one more question, and then I'll open it to anyone who wants to make t-shirts. So this is, I guess, a personal question. we talked about bandwidth in the beginning, right? And you're making space to be able to listen and making a point of being helpful to others. What do you do, I would say, kind of on your day-to-day basis, or what's kind of in your toolkit for you to continue operating at such like a high-performing level? Or do you feel like you're
really
giving the space and giving up? Yeah, go for it.
Blowing bubbles in Phoebe's belly. And Phoebe is my dog. That is that every morning, like when we wake up and, there's nobody else in bed, so it's just her. So I mean, she is the cutest belly in the world. She's 7, so just hope she's around a good chunk more time, but that gives me energy, and I know that sounds like I'm crazy dog lady, but that's what I am. I also, I love people. I love my team. I love our clients. There's days where I'm just like, oh my God, complete imposter syndrome. But then I just have to sit back and be like, wait, we're making a difference. We're making an impact. So I think that's what keeps me going.
Definitely. You said you had that little birdie that said like, when you were writing the book, I called them little birdies, but whatever the thought that was in your head that said like, no one wants to hear from you. No one wants to hear from you.
My God, I get, and several of you in this room know, I mean, I have deep imposter syndrome sometimes. I mean, tiny. I mean, when I used to walk in, to this day, when I used to, I'm still the same size, but I would walk into conference rooms and parties and nobody would see me. So that, for those of us who are diminutive in size, that definitely leads to challenges. I have a dear friend, Mona Aarons-Melee, who wrote a book called Hiding in the Bathroom. She's 6'1". And she and I are both in communications, and we once were on a podcast together talking about how our world, our lives are so affected by how we see, and I mean really how we see.
Yeah, so, very much literally.
By the way, she has a great podcast on HBR called The Anxious Achiever. Highly recommended. So.
Wow. Okay, well what I wanted to say was the birdie.
Yes.
The birdie did not stop you from filling this room with people that want to hear from you.
Thank you.
Did not stop you from writing like a topic of 2021, 2022, 2023, and the future. So with that, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, or comments, or stories to share.
Or did someone make the t-shirt yet?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. Thanks so much for this talk, and thanks for posting it so I knew what to show up. My name's Elizabeth Werby, and I'm curious to build on your comment around basically psychological safety, connection in the workplace.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few aspects of that, like getting beyond the weather, things we can do to help people show up as their best selves. Do you think the tide is starting to shift? As so much change is happening in the workplace now, retention being a big challenge, but also hybrid work, right? Really has impacted those friendships that were maybe more easy and natural to cultivate in person.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what you're sensing.
Sure, that's a great question, and thank you, Elizabeth, for coming and asking. A couple of things. One, as horrible as this pandemic has been, and we probably can't even begin to know the effects it will have on us long term from a mental and psychologically safe place. But this notion of realizing how important our relationships were became much more apparent. I think all of us, we realized we couldn't just go to the water cooler and connect. You have to go, bye, sweetheart. Call me. Thank you for coming. Now, can you just tell everybody who you are before you leave, so that they can follow you?
I'm Nell. I used to live in the city. I live up here now, and I do purposeful leadership, coaching, advising, writing, books coming out in a few months.
And how do people find you?
Nell Derek Debevoise.
That's
such a
cool.
mouthful. If you're a lawyer, you know Debevoise. You can figure that out. But Nell Purposeful Leadership, I haven't tested that. Probably actually finds me. Or find you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Connecting always.
She and I met at the Clinton Global Initiative in 2007 because she was one of the only few people who would talk to me because I was a nobody. Right? I mean, no, but seriously, when you go into these halls, right? So I get that insecurity too, believe me. But back to your question. So I do think we are putting relationships at a much higher value than we did before, and I think that's good. I think also this notion employees have much more power now than they ever did. Unions are making a comeback, so they're going to be the ones calling the shots. So if leadership isn't paying attention, they're going to have people, the great resignation is happening. And people want to feel connected. They want to feel that there's a bit of a purpose built into the company as opposed to just making
Right.
widgets or selling products.
Yeah.
So I feel good about that. It's challenging to keep my own employees, but so I see it from both sides, but I also believe, it's about time that employees have more power.
Right. Thanks.
Jane.
I can't decide between these two questions, so you decide. One is about investing in female startups. Just want to know how you got kind of dragged into that, because she pulls hint water out of her refrigerator. She's like, yeah, I invested in this, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I gave a Girl Scout money. Okay, so cookies. And the other one is, I know you're very big in the ESG space and social justice, and whenever I see like a full page ad in the New York Times, I think, I wonder if Susan had her finger in this.
Well,
So pick
Yeah. Well, the angel investing happened about 11, maybe 10 years ago when I realized I wasn't putting kids through college. And because of my mom's horrible death, there was a bit of money that my family received from a class action lawsuit that obviously years ago I invested. And I decided, again, along with honoring my mom and continuing her legacy as a serial connector, I would also be able to honor her by investing in women-led startups. So I've done 21.
Wow, that's
I made
fabulous.
$0. I made $0. So I'm at that point where at least one of them hopefully will turn. But at the same token, it isn't just about. I write. There's a chapter in the book about using our resources as we can. Not everyone is privileged enough to be able to do what I was able to do. But it is a powerful way to build connections. And if you look back at the patriarchy, men have been doing this forever. Right? They've been funding each other and going to the golf club. So this is my little way in my little world to make a difference. And yes, Hintwater is one of them. The Muse, I could go on and on and on. Stacey London has a new company called Stata. But I would never recommend my strategy because what happens is I fall in love with the founder and I write a check, which is not what you're supposed to do, right? You're actually supposed to look at the cap table and look. No. And then in terms of yes, we push our clients to be voices of as knowing that it's challenging for companies to speak out on various issues. We also know the research shows that people want to be hearing from the private sector because there's more trust in the private sector than there is, sadly, in our religious organizations and our government. So if a business is going to sit by and not say anything for fear of risk, we're missing a tremendously important voice. So yes, we are behind a couple of them. One of our clients is an organization called the Leadership Now Project, which is business leaders who use their power to protect democracy. Reid Hoffman is one of the founders of the organization. Another, we were and we're still active in Don't Ban Equality, which is to try to prevent banning of abortion, because whatever you think, it's going to affect business. So what we're trying to do is educate the private sector to speak out on this, not necessarily about their moral beliefs, but more important, not more important, but as important, is going to affect their workforce, because you're going to have different states with different roles. So part of the work that we do is helping them find that voice and then communicate that voice. So thank you, Jane.
Great.
It's a slog.
Yeah, it's been important, but in the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, I was surprised that the American companies acted, so definitively.
Yeah.
And it does make a difference. And also to just see the growth in the last 5 years of companies doing stuff, whether they stand up for trans people or gay people, it's just,
It's a world of difference.
They can
years
make
ago.
a big difference.
Well, and they have power and money. The challenge I see with all of it, though, also is when they say something but they do something else. And you have many companies who are funding politicians that are potentially, and I certainly don't want to get into whole political what everybody's saying, but it's like if you're going to do something like that, make sure you clean your closet and ensure that you are, everybody's kind of meeting in the minds, right? Because for instance, in Texas, you have companies who are funding the politicians who are supporting anti-abortion movements, et cetera, but then talking about how they're all about gender equality. It's like, so that's where it
But I
gets a
love the
little
people
squirrely.
like you who hold their feet to the fire.
We try.
But
All
if
90
we all
pounds in
can
me.
just in whatever little circumstance we're in, The same way everybody's trying to do whatever they can for Ukraine right now, whatever
No.
little thing, you know?
Yeah, no, every single action, every one of us take
Mhm.
matters.
Yeah.
You know, even if you can do one thing a week, do it. That's all. Question,
I
yes?
was curious, Susan, Laura Davis, we
Yeah,
met years ago.
years
Through many mutual friends. But anyway, you had mentioned Adam Grant, and I read his book Give and Take,
Yeah.
and I work in finance, and so much of what you're saying resonates in terms of approaching people with an
Yeah.
attitude of trying to help.
Yeah.
And wondering, did you read his book? Did that influence you?
Yes, and
Yes.
I interviewed him for my book.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, yes. In fact, when he wrote that Give and Take, there was a big New York Times Magazine piece about it, and Susan Dominus, who happens to be a friend, wrote it. So I reached out to her. I was like, Susan, I'd love to do. At the time, I had something on Twitter called CSR Chat, and I said, let's see if we can do a Twitter chat or CSR chat with Adam and you about the book. And so that's how I got to know him, and then over the years, just stayed in touch. I mean, he's like up here, but you know.
You're over there too.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe this way. Anyway, again, I'm not into hierarchies, but yes, he agreed to be interviewed by the book, and he gave me a quote for the book too. So, but thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we can linger around. You guys can get your books signed. The books are on us, so definitely get them signed and get some comments and hang out. And again, t-shirts.
I have a quick question. So you talk about the energy of connecting,
Yeah.
and you know, energy is such a personal
Right.
concept.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert? Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting because, you know, for any of us who ever have to do a lot of public speaking or a lot being out there, it takes such huge energy that actually, for me, my energy comes from often being alone,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
I spend 90% of my time among loads of people. I'm just curious.
Well, there's a chapter in the book called Connecting for Introverts. And I joke that in my next life, I want to be an introvert so that I can better understand. But in the research that I did for this, and I talked to several kind of known, like Susan King, and people who have made being an introvert a very public thing, as public as they feel is comfortable, right? And the gather round student methodology actually is probably a little bit more let's just say acceptable to somebody who may be introverted, because you're asking questions and then you get to sit back and listen versus being the one who has to, right? And I think honestly it grew out of my issue years ago of being the tiniest person in the room, and I'd be talking to somebody and they would just look over me. So if I started asking them questions, they tended to stay more engaged, right? Like it was probably some subliminal thing that I wasn't even aware of. I mean, I'm talking back in the 90s when I would go to like Comdex and, you know, some of the big tech trade shows. Admar ran several major PR agencies, like throughout. She's a big deal, really. And secondly, I offer in the book this notion of go with the power of three. And you can try this today. Go to meet 3 people, learn 3 things, and share 3 things. And then you can go hide in the bathroom. Or meet 2 people and share 2 things, right? But it's like, you know, it's a way when you're going to an event and you're just like, ugh. And especially now, like, I mean, I was at a conference last week in Utah, and all of a sudden I did a speech and I got off stage and I was like, oh my God, I have to talk to all these people. Like, that's me, right? So I can only imagine how, you know, it's after 2 years, it's hard. So by having this type of just, you know, boundary setting could be useful. And so, and there's a bunch of other tips on this, but I think this notion of being able to ask a few questions and then just sit back could be a little more, and have those questions like in your back pocket, right?
Yeah.
At the ready. So thank you for asking that. Oh my gosh, thank you all for coming.
It was wonderful.
Can we just go around the room and everybody say their name? Just alumni. I mean, because there's so many amazing people here, and I just want to make sure we're going to meet. And we'll start with Zara.
I'm Zara, new to Connecticut from the city.
Welcome. And Zara is a incredibly successful marketer for GE. So,
Wow.
oh, that's so good. And has 3 children.
3 children, yes.
Yeah.
No dog.
No, not yet. But her kids watch dogs, so I'm sure.
Exactly.
I'm Emer Hines, and I've been a long time in Connecticut, but still grappling with Manhattan versus Connecticut.
Oh, but originally from Ireland, yes.
Ireland, grew up in Ireland, early career in London, Silicon Valley tech.
Yeah, I mean, we met in the mid-90s, I think.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
And Clayton?
Yeah, I'm Clayton. I'm the programming director here for SaksWorks, and right now based out of New York City.
Good job.
Thank you.
I mean, bringing her. Just
For sure.
I'm Lynn Lavery. I'm currently a, you change all the time. Right now,
Yes.
I'm a realtor in Greenwich. I'm Irish. And, and of course, in my industry, we truly believe in connecting. And I thought you were just wonderful.
Thank you. And Jane brought you.
Yes, she did. She called and said, you have to come.
Oh,
And I had just collected eggs from my chickens.
oh my God. All right, I know I'm not
Okay.
in Brooklyn right now.
And she has Irish grandchildren too.
I do.
Oh.
Her son lives in Ireland.
Oh, I love that.
So I'm Jane Condon. That's it. Okay.
No, Jane is a award-winning comedian who I encourage you, if you ever get to see her live perform, it is such a remarkable treat, and you will smile for hours.
And when is the next event?
Oh, Modesto, California.
Oh,
Yeah, everybody will have the PJ, the private jet will be coming to get all of
I
you.
think that's great. Maybe SaksWorks has a private jet.
What, sorry?
She lives in
I live
Greenwich.
in Greenwich, janecondon@gmail.
Yeah.
Sheepboard.com.
You have to.
Oh, but go on Instagram. I have some funny reels now. She taught me how to do an elephant.
Oh, no, shame.
She doesn't care. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
All right, I give the first time I've had an elephant impersonation.
I'm still learning, but I do other animals.
Oh my God, you two have to do that together, and we have to catch it on
Do you
film.
want a workshop on this?
Yeah.
I have on Reels, on Instagram Reels, I'm doing all these animal impressions because they want to make them short. And when I do comedy, it's longer. But I'm coming up with some plant impressions. I just, not to give too much away, but I'm going to be doing some plants like
There's
an
a
orchid.
plant right there.
You know, like an orchid. You know, please do not put me on a corsage. Don't send me to prom.
That's really good, Jane.
Oh, good. This is why she's my friend.
I get it.
Well, I am way too boring after Jane.
No, nobody's boring.
But she's important.
Well, no, Marcia O'Kane, I head up the Chamber of Commerce. We put on over 30 networking programs a year. So if you want to practice, get on our email list.
Amazing.
Our first in-person networking event is going to be here at
Amazing.
SaksWorks in May. So we hope to see you
I love it.
again.
Have you two met?
No.
No, I mean, this is a good person to meet.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Werby. I grew up here in Greenwich and I'm currently in transition, seeking a new opportunity, if anyone has any leads, in designing and facilitating powerful transformative experiences for purpose-driven leaders.
Amazing. You need to connect with them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's how I found out about
Okay,
that.
got it. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming. And what you just did is so important, like putting it out there. You know, I had an interview back, I can't remember, they were like, well, what's next for you? And it was the first time I said on a stage, I want to fall in love. It hasn't happened yet, but anyhow, but I remember after I said that, I was like, I can't believe I just
Maybe
said
Carlton's available.
that. Clayton, my son.
That works.
Sorry.
That works.
Now he's turning bright red. But that's the thing, it's like we have to put these things, and it's a way to connect, right? If we're gonna keep this stuff inside, we're losing opportunities.
I'm Tyler. I work for a private equity firm here. It's my first job out of college. This is my first time in New York or Connecticut.
Amazing.
Yeah, I just kind of stumbled upon this today, so I'm down here. Yeah.
Oh,
Where are you from?
I'm from California,
What part?
from Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a big difference.
A big jump.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, so
welcome.
where I am.
Yeah, welcome to Connecticut.
Yeah.
He helped on the reversal of Jay.
Yeah.
And are you a member of SaksWorks? Is that?
I'm on a complimentary day pass.
Oh, all right. All right. I think hopefully we swayed you to become a member. I know. I might stay over, actually.
My name is Laura Davis,
Yeah.
and I live in New Canaan, and I work here in Greenwich. I thought this was actually a webinar, so I bought my yogurt from home, and I looked out. it's around the corner, so I want to go to JP Morgan around the corner,
Oh.
and
Yeah.
just find connecting with people in the community, fabulous, so thank you, so good to see you after
I
many years, and
know,
also a
you
friend of
haven't
mine,
aged
so
a
she
bit.
threw me on her LinkedIn, like, oh, what is this, so.
Wonderful. I met Laura years ago. JP Morgan Chase was, when Delilah was the head of the foundation,
Yes.
you all were a client, and we created a whole messaging campaign around an amazing program that JP Morgan Chase created called the Fellowship, which took kids growing up and going to some of the most distressed high schools, and they would put them on a 4-year leadership program. And they would come into JP Morgan, and employees would help tutor, advise, counsel, mentor, and something like 99% of these, and they were all boys, young men, actually went on to college. I mean, it was such it was a very expensive program for a company to take on, where it wasn't, in fact, when you're JP Morgan, you want to have these big, but this was very focused. But what then happened is that program was replicated in Detroit, in LA, and various places.
Wow.
So I'll never forget that. I learned so much about it and from it, and again, it was one of those situations where the company chose to do this. So anyway.
Thank you for your contribution.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh, I could just stay here all day, but everybody has to go in and out of it.
You're welcome to stick
But
around.
I'm happy to
stay,
sign a book, and
Get a book signed. And thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for coming. Oh my gosh.